They said it was just a whisper, nothing proven, nothing official, but it was enough. Enough to pull her badge, erase her clearance, and reduce years of service to silence. Captain Marilyn didn't fight it, not at first. She vanished into protocol, her name stripped from briefings, her seat left empty. But whispers don't bury truth, they only delay it. And when the moment came, when lives hung on a shot no one else could take, she stepped forward. One breath, one choice. And with it, reclaimed everything they tried to take. Replies set up when you're ready for the next section. Captain Marilyn never looked like what people expected from someone with sniper certification. At 5'4", quiet-spoken, and with a face that held more patience than hardness. She often passed unnoticed even in rooms where she outranked half the table. She liked it that way. Precision was her world-measured breath, steady hand, silence where it mattered most. You don't shout a shot into existence. You wait for it. She grew up in the outskirts of Spokane, Washington, raised by her grandfather, a Korean War veteran who taught her discipline with a calm hand and quiet mornings. You don't fight the wind, he used to say. You let it pass and shoot through it. It was from him she learned patience. From her mother, who left early and never came back, she learned endurance. By the time Mara entered military service, she was already marked not by violence, but by restraint. She never missed a mark in training, never lost her temper in briefing rooms, never raised her voice to be heard. But that didn't make her invisible. It made her threatening in a different way, because she noticed things. She questioned quietly, and she remembered everything. Within 6 years, she had risen through the ranks of reconnaissance intelligence and later was fast-tracked into special operations. Her official designation was Field Intelligence Liaison. But everyone on the ground knew her as the one they called when a target couldn't be touched either. For political reasons or sheer physical difficulty, she was sent in for clarity, for removal, for finality. It wasn't the violence she remembered. It was the quiet afterward. But all of that collapsed in a single afternoon. It started with a mission in Galais province, and extraction meant to be clean, silent, and invisible. A suspected arms dealer had fled into a neutral border town under diplomatic asylum. Mara had the shot lined up from a ruined bell tower 2 kilometers away, too far for any standard mark, but well within her capability. She didn't take it. She held. Something felt wrong. The next morning, her refusal was logged, and that was the last mission she was assigned. Whispers began weeks later. They were subtle at first. Comments slipped into file reviews. A pause before her name was mentioned in debriefs. Then, an internal investigation launched as a precaution. She wasn't told the charges, only that her security clearance was temporarily suspended, pending a review of her conduct and field decisions. In the military, a temporary suspension is like a slow bleed. You don't fall, you're left to fade. Her sidearm was turned in, her office reassigned. Her voice, once steady in briefings, was absent. No one defended her publicly. And that was worse than accusation. It was erasure. Officially, they said it was procedural. Unofficially, someone had whispered that she hesitated not from instinct but from sympathy, that she had compromised the mission out of personal feeling. No evidence, no confrontation, just a single word passed by a voice no one would name. Sympathy. In her world, that was enough to burn a career. She spent the next 8 months in low-level clerical rotations at Fort Mason, logging drone footage, cross-checking terrain maps. For missions she used to lead, no one said it, but everyone knew. She was the ghost in the room, still saluted, still addressed as captain, but without gravity, without center. And yet Mara did not protest. She watched, listened, waited not for vindication, but for a moment, because somewhere deep in her file logs, she saw something that didn't sit right. A pattern in targeting data from Galais province. Shifted coordinates, sensor echoes that didn't match weather conditions. A secondary heat signature logged but never acknowledged. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it was enough to... No, someone wanted that shot taken desperately. And someone didn't want questions about why it hadn't been. She buried the data in a secure drive, locked it away, and said nothing. Because truth needs timing, And then one day it came, an alert brief urgent sent to every strategic base within 5,000 miles. An unauthorized convoy had crossed a red zone border, allegedly hostile, unknown intent. The only recon team in place was pinned in a communications blackout. No visibility. And no one left with high-altitude marksman clearance in range, except Mara Lynn. No one asked her. The call didn't come through command, it came from someone else. Major Ridley, former field engineer, one of the few who had worked with her before the suspension. He said only two things. We need someone who doesn't miss, and this time, no one's watching but the target. The truck was moving at 40 miles per hour across shifting terrain, crosswinds at 17 knots, visibility compromised by low cloud cover, distance 2,703 meters. And Mara, she didn't hesitate. She set the coordinates, checked the vectors, said nothing, and took the shot. The bullet didn't echo. It didn't need to. Silence was the measure of its success. One calibrated breath, a whisper of pressure, and the mission-altering round traced a curve across 2.7 kilometers of turbulent air-passed branches, dirt, haze, and steel armoring, till it met its mark, the rear axle joint of the convoy's lead truck. Not a kill shot, not this time, a stop shot, and that made all the difference. The convoy jolted to a halt just outside the village perimeter. Troops from a nearby joint peacekeeping unit scrambled into position. A standoff was avoided. No civilians harmed. The truck's passengers, once inspected, included not insurgents, but 5 hostages, gagged and bruised, hidden beneath loose cargo panels, government contractors, 2 of them flagged missing 3 weeks earlier. One was a translator. Mara had worked with Ingles province. And just like that, the story unraveled. The original Whisper, the one that stole her badge, her voice. Her name had claimed she froze during that earlier mission due to sympathy. Now, it turned out, her hesitation had spared 5 lives. She hadn't been soft, she'd been right. But the truth didn't apologize. Instead, it slunk back into the same channels that had erased her. The after-action report credited an unnamed asset with technical intervention. No mention of a reinstated rank. No note on the reversal of suspension. No explanation to the public or even to most of her peers about who had stopped what might have become an international disaster. She hadn't expected praise, but she had expected correction. It didn't come. And that was the real wound. Mara watched from the sidelines as the headlines called the resolution a tactical miracle, attributing the outcome to improved inter-division response time. A carefully crafted narrative unfolded, one that omitted her entirely. And in that omission, something broke. Not her calm that remained, but a sense of trust in. As paper finally tore, she approached Major Ridley the next morning. He met her outside the secure wing, coffee in hand, still in yesterday's wrinkled uniform. "You did it," he said quietly, almost reverently. "I know," Mara replied. "You kept a lot of people alive." "I know that too." He hesitated. "They're not going to put your name on the report. I figured they say it'll raise questions about who authorized your presence, about your prior suspension." Mara looked away for the first time. "So the truth costs too much." "No," he said gently. "It just makes too many people uncomfortable." That, to her, was worse. Uncomfortable truths were the ones that mattered most. She walked away without anger, just calculation, quiet, methodical thought. And that night, she opened the secure drive she had locked months ago, the one with the sensor data, the weather anomalies, the heat signature no one reviewed. And she prepared a report of her own, not for revenge, not even for restitution, but because truth isn't about comfort, it's about record. Still, she didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, she did something that felt far harder. She asked for a meeting with the Oversight Committee. It took a week to arrange. Several calls, formal denials, then one reluctant acceptance. The room was cold, metallic, buried 3 floors below the administration wing. 7 officers, 2 civilians, 1 legal advisor. Mara stood at the end of the table, She wore no uniform, only a pressed white shirt and the same field boots she'd worn in galleys. She handed them the file. No preamble, no plea. Inside, proof that the original galleys intel had been tampered with, coordinates falsified, political interests tied to a private contractor who stood to gain from the assassination of the arms dealer, an assassination she had refused to execute. That's why the whisper started, she said simply. Not because I froze, because I didn't. The room was still. The legal advisor leaned forward. Captain Lin, are you implying someone inside the chain of command intentionally leaked false reports about your hesitation? I'm not implying anything, she said. I'm documenting it. Why now? Because I waited for the mission to end, for lives to be saved, for the lie to be harmless, and it still isn't. There was silence. No objections, but no thanks either. The next day, an internal memo was issued. Mara Lin's rank was to be reinstated, clearance restored, prior suspension expunged from her permanent record, but no public announcement was made, no apology issued, no whisper, reversed, and that's when she understood the real conflict. It wasn't about the whisper that took her rank. It was about the culture that let it matter more than facts, the silence that followed suspicion, the comfort that protected power. She hadn't just lost trust in procedure. She'd seen how easily entire rooms could pretend not to know better, just to keep balanced, and that knowledge made her choose something different. She turned down her next deployment. Instead, she requested reassignment voluntary duty in officer ethics, education, and protocol development. When asked why, she answered plainly, because I want to train the next generation to ask better questions and not wait for permission to trust what they see. She taught them not how to fire, but how to hold fire, how to see through spin, how to document everything, how to respect instinct without letting it blur into bias. The recruits listened, some reluctantly, some curiously. One cadet, during a seminar break, asked, "Do you ever regret not taking that first shot?" Mara looked at him for a long moment, then answered, "If I had taken it, I'd still have my rank, but 5 people would be dead. So no, I don't regret the shot I didn't take. I regret that I had to lose everything before anyone asked why." And that finally was the truth they couldn't take from her. Not with whispers, not with silence, and certainly not with fear. The letter arrived without fanfare. No envelope sealed, no courier markings, just a folded sheet slipped under Mara's door while she was instructing a seminar on target validation protocols. She didn't open it until later that night, once the base had gone quiet and the metal halls returned to their echoing stillness. It was from General Hesse, recently appointed Director of Tactical Oversight, a name she'd heard before, but never expected to intersect with again. His handwriting was tight, methodical, like someone who spent a lifetime drafting commands. Instead of apologies, "Captain Lin, I've reviewed your independent report. Your instincts were correct not only in Gallus, but in your refusal to submit to pressure disguised as protocol. But what strikes me more than your marksmanship is your restraint. You didn't take a shot, not because you couldn't, but because you knew the shot wasn't yours to take. That clarity, especially under pressure, saved lives. And it revealed something this institution has lacked, the courage to doubt itself. We owe you more than reinstatement. We owe you a seat." The final paragraph wasn't long, but it changed everything. Effective immediately, you are to serve as special strategic advisor to the Director of Oversight. Your mandate will include full access to intelligence audit systems, operational transparency protocols, and direct input on rules of engagement for all Black Zone actions. You earned your rank back in one shot. Now we trust you to guard every one after it. Mara stared at the page for a long time, not out of disbelief, but because something in her had gone still. Not hollow, just quiet. The kind of quiet that settles not after a fall, but after a stand. She folded the letter, slipped it into her desk drawer beside the old target photo from Galesta one she never took the shot on, the one no one knew she'd kept, and then she packed her bag. Washington was not a reward, it was a reckoning. From the moment she entered the Strategic Command Annex, people watched her not with reverence, but with unease. She wasn't a general. She wasn't a politician. She was something they didn't quite know what to do with. A soldier who had not only refused an order, but had been proven right for it. They couldn't frame her as insubordinate anymore, but they didn't know how to frame her at all. In the first meeting she attended, a senior logistics officer questioned her authority. With respect, Captain Lin, you're here because of a unique circumstance? But let's not confuse instinct with policy. She answered him plainly. With respect, sir, I'm here because 5 people are alive today, and because a policy failed to account for what instinct caught. The room didn't clap, but no one interrupted again. Weeks later, during a closed-door intelligence audit, she stumbled across the name Callum Drexler, the contractor who had initially supplied the faulty GLA's intel. He'd vanished shortly after her suspension, reappeared under a new name, listed as an external advisor in 2 different drone operations. No formal charges, no review, just quietly moved, protected. She dug deeper and found something worse. He'd submitted an early draft of the gala's coordinates under a different operation code 1 meant for urban demolition trials, not insurgent surveillance, meaning the coordinates weren't just wrong. They had been recycled from a test range. The original mission was never about a target. It was about pushing through weapons data. Mara stared at the evidence, not angry, not vindicated, just resolved, because this wasn't about her anymore. This was about what got buried under the word classified. That night, she met with General Hess in his private office. No aides, no cameras. Are you prepared for what this means? He asked after she laid the files on his desk. Yeah, you'll be going up against contractors protected by 3 administrations. I'm not aiming at them, she said. Just the truth. He leaned back, studied her face, then nodded. Then let's make it official. The hearing wasn't public. Not at first. But word leaked first through whispers in the audit corps, then across the brass chain, then in a single searing article published by a defense ethics journalist who had once been embedded with her unit. The headline didn't mention Glaze. It didn't even mention Mara by name. It simply read, "The shot she didn't take, and the silence that tried to bury it." And then the world noticed. Senators called for a broader investigation. Contractors were subpoenaed. One resigned. Another refused to testify. But the noise was too loud now. The truth had reached altitude, and it wasn't coming down. Weeks later, as Mara walked through the Pentagon courtyard, she passed 2 junior officers standing by a bench. One of them glanced up, stiffened, saluted. The other followed. But what struck her wasn't the salute. It was the silence that followed. Respectful, earned, not because she shot something, but because she didn't. And because, in the end, that restraint did more to restore trust in the system than any weapon ever could. Mara didn't ask for a parade. She wouldn't have accepted one even if they'd offered. By the time the hearings ended and the policy reforms began, her name had become shorthand in certain corners of the defense world. A quiet kind of legacy, not in statues, not in slogans, but in footnotes, in rewritten rules, in margins once overlooked. They called it the Lin Protocol, a clause added to all high-risk field operations, requiring a mandatory human judgment override before drone strikes could be authorized in densely populated zones. It wasn't a celebration of her past. It was a safeguard for the future. And still, she walked the halls of oversight with the same quiet step she'd always had, shoulders squared, eyes level, voice rarely raised. She didn't need volume. She had consequence. There was no grand moment of redemption, no courtroom outburst or teary-eyed apology from the people who doubted her. But slowly, the silence that once erased her began to bend, not loudly, but unmistakably. One afternoon, a letter appeared on her desk, unmarked, folded crisply. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Maja Ridley. Inside was just one sentence. You held your shot, and we held our breath. Turns out, you were the only one steady enough to save both. She kept that note tucked into her ID holder, between a faded field photo and the old transfer form that never went through. It was enough. Her work shifted again, gradually. She took on a mentorship, role training, not just operatives, but decision makers, teaching them what had almost been forgotten, that power isn't just in pulling the trigger, it's in choosing not to. That integrity isn't instinct, it's discipline. And she learned something too. For every system built to silence people like her, there were other tired, unfinished waiting to be built by people who had been silenced once and chose to speak anyway. One of her brightest mentees, Lieutenant Arjun Davis, once asked her during a late-night review, did it ever feel like the silence was louder than the truth? Mara paused, then answered, every time, but truth holds. Silence folds. It wasn't a slogan. It was lived experience. Years passed. The story of her suspension faded from headlines. But inside the institution, her presence remained like scaffolding added to a cracked wall. Quiet support. Unseen strength. Once, during a cross-agency ethics seminar, a general unfamiliar with her history challenged her mid-session. Not rudely, just dismissively. Captain Lin, he said, I understand your concerns, but in real-time combat, we don't always have the luxury of questioning data. She didn't flinch. She simply replied, no, sir, but we always have the responsibility to question why we were given it. Silence followed, then, slowly, nods, because there's a kind of authority that no insignia can lend. Only truth. In the background, one final matter quietly reached its conclusion. Callum Drexler, the contractor who had falsified the Gala's data, was indicted under federal investigation for manipulation of defense contracts and fraudulent intelligence submission. His name never appeared in the news. The story was quietly buried beneath layers of classification and legal insulation. But Mara received confirmation from a contact in internal affairs. She didn't celebrate, didn't gloat. She simply returned to her office, opened a blank file, and began drafting an internal case study titled, The Shot Not Taken, Ethics of Restraint in Active Field Conditions. Not for vengeance, for education. Because if there was one thing she had learned, it was this. Memory protects power, but stories protect people. On her final day before retirement, Mara stood in front of the Ethics Academy's graduating class. No cameras, no press. Just 22 officers, fresh uniforms, fresh faces. She spoke for 12 minutes. Nothing dramatic. She ended with this. Your career will not be measured by how many times you follow orders. It will be measured by how many times you paused before you did. Because war doesn't begin with chaos. It begins with unchecked certainty. And if you remember nothing else, remember this. Your silence has weight. Use it wisely. When she stepped down, the room was still, and one by one, they stood. Not in ceremony, in understanding. Retirement wasn't really retirement. It was transition. She moved back to Washington State, a small town outside Spokane, close to where it all began. Her house was quiet. Just a garden, a porch, and a wall where she hung two framed items. One was her reinstatement letter. The other was a small photo from the Galay's mission, blurred, low-resolution, time-stamped. It showed the bell tower where she lay prone, holding her shot in the corner. The faint outline of the truck, still moving. That day, no one died. That day, she became what no one could erase. Once a year, she received a package, always from a different sender. Always the same contents, a handwritten note from a soldier, an analyst, a recruit. Each one began with the words, because you held your shot, and continued with a story. A call they paused to double, signature they refused to authorize, a truth they spoke, even if quietly. Each one signed not with their title, but with a word, respect, dignity, responsibility, and sometimes simply, Mara. She kept them in a wooden box by the window, never showed them to anyone, but every now and then, when the news screamed or her bones ached or her garden flooded with autumn rain, she opened that box and remembered. She had not fired to be remembered, but she had been remembered because she hadn't fired. And that more than medals or headlines or briefings was peace. Some stories are measured, not in the actions taken, but in the ones withheld. Captain Marilyn didn't rise by force. She rose by clarity. By stillness, by knowing when not to attend, standing by that choice, even as it cost her everything. She lost her rank to a whisper, but earned it back with one shot, the kind taken not in anger, but in responsibility. In a world that often rewards reaction over reflection, Mara reminds us that quiet strength is not weakness. It's the hardest kind of courage, the kind that doesn't demand recognition, just truth. If her story moved you, if you've ever held back when you knew the world needed pause, not pressure coming with the word, because dignity isn't just how you speak, it's how you choose to stand still. And sometimes stillness is what saves us all.